They used to tell us that with sexuality, you were just born that way. But 30% of Gen Z weren't born LGBT or Q. So what's the truth behind the gender fad? Find out today on Restoration Spotlight. I'm Hayden Ludwig, and thanks for tuning in. Puberty blockers, hormones, and surgeries. These are the tools ideologues use to mutilate the bodies of our young people before they grow old enough to consider the consequences. Then there's the group pressure to adopt pronouns, cross-dress, and even change your name. America's youth are threatened by a cynical promise of liberation from their own bodies, and parents are often deliberately removed from that discussion until it's too late. We're told it's compassionate to help children turn themselves into lifelong hospital patients, to feed gender dysphoria, or even to create mental illness where it never existed. My guest today offers parents real answers to these challenges. Pamela Garfield Yeager is a licensed social worker and author of A Practical Response to Gender Distress, and she's one of the heroes revealing the pattern of lies and manipulation foisted on America's children. Pamela, thank you for joining Restoration Spotlight.
Hello, thank you.
So let's start with a simple question. 1 in 3 Gen Z Zoomers claims to be LGBTQ, emphasis on the T. But how common is real, genuine gender dysphoria as opposed to the stuff that is really just chic or, following the times?
Gosh, it's honestly really hard to answer because how do we even define what is real gender dysphoria? Some people would argue that whole diagnosis doesn't even make sense. I would categorize it as someone who has true distress, that they really feel uncomfortable in their body in a very deep way, that they truly believe that they're trapped in the wrong body. However, I don't believe that people truly are trapped in the wrong body. So it really depends on how you define it. So I don't believe there's a true transgender. There isn't a true trapped gender soul in anyone's body. But there are truly people who feel it.
Yeah, that's interesting you make that point because a lot of what I've realized over the years is a lot of the ideologies that we're dealing with around things like this are kind of an upside down pyramid, right? There's one little thing that if you buy this one premise, which may or may not have any scientific validation to it, you can build atop of that this whole skyscraper of beliefs and stuff and actions that follow from all of that. But what you're saying is, from a medical perspective, there may not even be a valid definition of what actual gender dysphoria is.
No, I think that's actually intentional too. I think it's a way to confuse us, to silence us, and to just create more chaos within this whole topic.
That's fascinating. Give us a working definition. So if you were trying to, as an expert, trying to separate between somebody who is maybe dealing with anxiety and depression and loneliness, in their teenage years, versus somebody who may actually have something approaching a genuine medical problem, do you differentiate between them? Is it helpful to do that? And if you do, how?
Oh, so we're talking generally mental illness or mental struggles. Gosh, this can get real deep. But what I was going to say about the gender dysphoria is it's really a symptom of other mental health issues. So that's how I would define that. In terms of how do we define what's a real mental illness? I honestly don't even know how to specifically answer that. I would see that the people who truly can't function, people who are struggling day to day, they can't get up and take showers or work. And it's not a behavioral reason. It's not a response to simply because of their environment. But it really does get muddled. You've opened up a really big can of worms there.
Okay, so let's take somebody then who is vulnerable to an ideologue coming in and saying, you know what, I think the answer to your problems is you're not actually a man, you're a woman trapped in a man's body. Give us a sense of what kind of person might be vulnerable to this, a young person in particular.
Yeah, so in general, obviously, young people, just because of their age, is vulnerable to it, and I think that's why they're targeting children. And then we have specific young children who are going to really gravitate towards that, and those are one population that really gravitate towards it are autistic kids. So kids that have struggles socially, have struggles understanding cues, have sensory load issues, maybe struggling dating, are perpetually online. Uh, all of the symptoms of autism really lend itself to believing that they might be trapped in the wrong body. And then also, it's harder to pull them out of that idea because they have more rigid thinking. They kind of see things in very black and white terms. So, this is why autistic people tend to gravitate towards this, and they are marketed to. They have their own special flag. So, I believe there are some nefarious players that know this and are marketing to this population.
So it's almost like you have these real, genuine struggles, and this is a silver bullet solution to dealing with those problems.
Yeah, and I was going to name, there's several more populations. The other major population is those who have trauma, specifically sexual trauma, because that's somebody who would reject their body, would hate their body, would be uncomfortable with their sexual parts, would want to get rid of those sexual parts. And so they're dissociated from their body. And really, a lot of what transgenderism is a dissociation from your body, from reality. And it gives you a belief that you have this answer to your pain.
Wow. So I said in the opener that 1 in 3 Zoomers, Gen Z people, young people, right, identifies as some form of LGBT or Q. And again, T is the big one we're talking about today. It's pretty common knowledge that this generation is struggling with some serious loneliness issues, connection issues. I think this might be the first time, at least in American history, maybe in human history, where you have such a divergence between men and women on how they vote, on the groups they hang out with, how they identify themselves. What I see as the common denominator here is a lack of confrontation with genuine problems that people may be addressing. That comes from the parents and grandparents, I think, to some degree, too. Normally, the elders in your society would kind of help ground you, and I don't think that's being done right now. But also a lack of community. And one of the words you hear a lot in this is you're now part of a transgender community. You've lost your atomization where it's just you struggling with real problems like anxiety, and now you're tapping into the village that you're part of. Even if you may not know anybody's part of it, you have this invisible, and I would say fake community, because there's no such thing as a community of people that don't know each other. Mm-hmm. But why? What's the emphasis there? Is it really they're trying to help these people? Is it they're trying to deceive them and lead them astray? How do you view that?
I think there's sort of two groups of people in doing this. I think there are people who are nefarious, I think they have bad intentions. I think they know what they're doing. I think they know they're recruiting these vulnerable young people who have severed families, who have trauma, who don't belong with their peers, perhaps overexposed to porn. They were all locked down during the COVID era and put on their screens. I don't think this was all an accident. However, I think most people who go along with it, or even my colleagues, because I am a therapist, I believe most of them don't recognize that this is a nefarious agenda, and they've been duped, and their empathy has been hijacked to believe that they're doing the right thing, that they're accepting and they're loving and kind. And our society is really afraid of confronting things that are uncomfortable, that are abnormal. They want to always accept things and not judge. And they also really don't want to look into things that are underneath, that take time, that take effort. We have a lot of quick fixes, medications, psych meds like antidepressants and anti-anxiety pills and ADHD pills. It's a lot about the quick fix, and the transgenderism also has this quick fix element to it.
Wow, I can see what you're saying. Kind of a pill-popping culture that would be susceptible to this idea of do hormone therapy and it'll make your problems go away. But
Exactly.
What I'm interested too, because your career is in therapy, this wasn't a big problem 30 years ago, but the theories existed. And I think that's a thing people don't understand is a lot of the ideas before they become mainstream, they become popularized in niche like sociology departments and the humanities and certain medical fields. So walk us through how the transgenderism concept came into existence and became what is frankly a national epidemic today.
Yeah, I believe it's a very much of a top-down effort. I don't think it's natural. I think that a lot of money has been poured into this transgenderism. We'd found out when Trump took over that there were a lot of governmental efforts to, put programs in. All these NGOs were funding programs to put these ideas into our culture, and all of the DEI initiatives to, for commercials to put it into our culture. We noticed all these brands were suddenly doing everything LGBT, really T, and that was not by accident. That was a top-down effort. Also, as you mentioned earlier, the breakdown of family within our culture, I think, makes it easier for people to be susceptible to this. And that's what this agenda is about also, which is breaking down the family. It divides parents from their children because it tells children that their parents are transphobic if they simply believe in reality. And then also it sterilizes these young people so that they're not able to create families of their own. And they're supposed to believe that this fake community, as you described it, which is perfect, is going to be their new family, which we all know it doesn't work out that way.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I don't know if you remember in the 2021 Virginia governor's race, Terry McAuliffe, the Democrat, running for election, made the comment that he basically separate students from their parents because it's really the teachers and the schools that are raising the kids. It's an extremely common mentality, and I think it's something the left has always had. The right is becoming, wise to and realizing what's going on there, whether they can stop that or not. But I do think it shows this idea of we have to divide parents from their children, because if the parents are involved, they might say, whoa, what is going on? You're a young man or a young woman. You can't change your pronouns without my knowing so. But that's happening in schools right now. And there's a lot of states right now, especially blue states, that have laws prohibiting parents, basically stopping parents from realizing that teachers are now using different pronouns for their children. No consent, no knowledge even. That's obviously malicious. That's not a well-intentioned thing.
Yeah, I'm from California. I don't live there anymore because I didn't want to be in the crazy anymore. But I was there. Yeah. I actually testified. That was one way people figured out who I was. I testified against this bill, which was AB 665. I don't remember what they called it, but they were trying to say it was to increase access to mental health. But what it was actually doing was allowing 12-year-olds to consent to their own residential treatment. So a school counselor could tell a child that if their parents hate them, they can go over to a group home and get help over there. And then the parents have to fight to get their kid back. And then they no longer have rights over their child. Wow. That's real in California. So I think I was there I'm a social worker, which is probably the worst of the worst. And they didn't used to be this bad. I'll just say that. However, I was around them, and I think most of them are naive to believe that they're doing the right thing, that they know better, that these parents just don't understand, and they're helping. I don't think most of them believe that they just want to snatch these kids from parents. They think they just know better because, these fuddy-duddy parents are harming their children and causing them to be suicidal. It's all a lie. It's all manipulation. But that is how they think.
Yeah, and I think we get the concept of dupes, but who are the people who actually know what they're doing when they do this? The architects of big trans, if you will.
Yeah, I wish I really knew all of these answers. I mean, I think there's a globalist agenda. So all those people in that circle, there's George Soros and the people that support him. I mean, I'm honestly not completely sure who is at the top that is, puppeteering this whole thing specifically. And there's certain people that I know of that I believe are very evil, like certain doctors. There's one that comes to mind. Her name is Dr. Joanna Olson Kennedy. Happily, they've just taken down that clinic, but she was the head of the gender clinic in Los Angeles Children's Hospital. And she's been doing this for many, many years, long before even I had heard about this. And really has the agenda to put all children on puberty blockers, which is insane. I met her once at a conference. I didn't know who she was at the time, but I remember having nightmares that night. And then I figured out who she was. And then I realized why I was having those nightmares. She's awful. and she's harmed many people. Happily, she is under fire now, and there is a lawsuit against her. A detransitioner has filed a lawsuit against her. She's the one that was in charge of that NIH study for puberty blockers. It was supposed to show that puberty blockers improve the mental health of children. However, the study did not show that, so she hid those results for 10 years. And now
Yes.
she's under fire for that. She was the one in charge of that study. So she's one that comes to mind. There are plenty of other players out there you could pluck out that you just know are evil, that have been doing evil things. But I bet someone's even puppeteering her because she's even relatively young. So I don't know the chain of command here, but
Yeah.
WPATH is the organization that leads the way, and they're full of evil people.
It is amazing how many of these institutions are children's hospitals. There's been a number of reports in the last few years, and it's if not dozens, it's hundreds of children's hospitals in big and small cities across the country. One thing that jumps out is, yeah, there's some malice involved. I think there's a lot of money involved too. You're creating
Yes.
lifelong patients, people who will always be in and out. And we say this is a quick fix to your mental issues, but actually, I mean, this is years and years and years of serious surgeries and therapies in and out. To walk us through what the actual process is here, because I think a lot of people go into it thinking it's going to be a simple process, but their eyes are not wide open.
Yeah, the internet makes it look really fun and glossy, especially to someone who's struggling or feels very isolated. They see these influencers that look really cool and kind of funky and quirky, and they have like cool haircuts and like funky clothes. And they'll show these videos of them after their what they call top surgery, which is a euphemism for a double mastectomy. And they'll act like it's really great and they're so happy and it's so wonderful and it's life saving. But what they don't see behind the scenes is the bleeding and the bruising and the pain and the numbness. And
Ugh.
then, of course, the possible regret, which happens very often when they realize that they made a bad decision. So they don't see that part. And yeah, and there's always another step. So it's sort of like chasing the dragon's tail. So they'll start off with hormones and they'll think that's going to save them or make them feel better. And usually initially it does. They call it, they're having euphoria because testosterone especially gives you a high. It gives you extra strength. It gives you a high. But we know there's such thing as roid rage. We know that it gives you mental instability. And also it creates a whole cascade of health issues that are not highlighted, like things that are just kind of unpleasant to talk about, like what happens to the thinning of the vaginal wall and enlarging of the clitoris causing pain, all kinds of blood clot issues, turbo cancers, pain in the throat and the voice. So they're excited, their voice changes. Oh, they could be male and pretend they're male, but then it actually creates pain and they can't speak or scream if they were in trouble or sing or laugh and just enjoy life with, you would normally, things that we all take for granted. So we have young, healthy people taking their body and creating an endocrine disorder. That's what we're doing. And people don't think about it that way. They just think, oh, we're just helping them. We're helping them feel better, more aligned. But what we're doing is we're creating health issues.
And how much of this is disclosed to them? Are there waivers they have to sign when you go in and sit down and the doctor congratulates you on this life decision? How much are you told up front about what it's actually going to entail?
Yeah, very little. They do give some paperwork and they'll minimize it. So they'll say, look, there might be this, there might be that, but it's very minimized. And of course, you've got these young people. Usually, we talk a lot about the children and we're outraged about that, which is very awful. But the population that's in a way more vulnerable are the 18 to 25-year-olds because they don't have their parents to stop it. And in certain states, there aren't laws to stop it. And they'll be given these little paperwork to sign and they don't really read it. They're just so eager. They're in that, just immediate gratification mode and they're trying to cover up or deal with their pain. They've been really brainwashed to believe that this is it for them. So they're not going to listen to the warnings. Plus, when you're that age, you think you're invincible. I thought I was invincible at that
Of
age.
course.
So they don't think about it and they're not warned and it's very much minimized.
Fascinating. Let's talk about more of the lies that you hear from therapists or social workers or people who would be adjacent or involved in that industry that are encouraging, especially young people, to go and pursue this lifestyle. What are the common lies that you hear?
Well, the biggest lie that you hear is that if you don't transition, you will die by suicide. Or if you don't allow this person to transition, they will kill themselves. So it's this emotional blackmail lie. And they'll say they have data to back it up. However, they have zero data to back it up.
Really?
Yes, there's no valid study that shows this. If you look, you'll see very, very small sample sizes. You'll see very skewed self-selected surveys that the person just, answered that are very biased. There's no way to know because we don't have a study with control groups. So we don't have a group of people identified as trans that get the transition and get all the medicine versus one that doesn't. That doesn't exist. So no one really has any proof of this whatsoever, but they make this claim like it's a fact. And then just me, that was really what kind of woke me up to this because I actually worked at a high school that had a mass isn't the right word, but a suicide cluster. There were 6 kids that actually died by suicide in this one school. So I was very much around in this environment where suicide was talked about, and I learned the do's and don'ts about suicide. And the number one rule about suicide is that you don't talk about it to people who are vulnerable to it. You don't tell that person that they might go ahead and do it before they're even thinking about it. That is completely against everything my profession has ever done. And that's what they're doing with this trans community in quotes.
So that's how you got involved in studying all this. I know you've written a book on it, excellent book on it, by the way.
Thank you. The way I actually got involved, I have this strange story. I had a disability. I still sort of have it partially. It's not as bad, but I was out of work for several years, 3 or 4 years. And that's when this really grew and got more bigger. And I came back to work in 2021. Really, this was in California during the lockdowns. And I was working at a new teen program, and there half the girls were identifying as trans. And to me, it was really, really shocking because I hadn't been in the field. I hadn't seen that happen. I hadn't seen it grow. And the more shocking part was what my colleagues were doing, or what my colleagues were not doing. They were not, exploring what was happening. They were affirming these trans identities. They were shaming the parents for having questions about it. And then I chose not to get the COVID vaccine because of my health issues. And so they fired me from that job. And that's when I became vocal about this issue.
One red pill after the next, as they would say.
Exactly. I had a lot of red pills. It was like a cascade for me.
A lot of us could say the same over the last decade, especially coming out of California. I completely understand. I also think that there's something to the idea, if you look at millennials and Zoomers as generational, they're very group-minded compared to their parents and grandparents. It's very interesting. You see these dynamics over about a century, how you have more individualistic and more group-minded generations. And I think that can be very beneficial at times if you're trying to, win a world war. But it can also reinforce some really bad tendencies. If one person says, "Hey, I'm actually transgender, and it's really helping me," and you have a very encouraging generation that wants to, we don't make people feel bad for things they can't control, which is all very true. I think you end up creating the fad where you can have 1 and 2 girls or boys now say that I'm LGBT or T, right? Especially the T here. That seems to me a thing that people in the industries around this recognize and definitely push. Because trying to create a group identity out of something that really, if it's a mental illness, there is no group identity around it. It's a struggle. It's something that you ought to be, even if it really was a genuine gender dysphoria illness, that's not something you wear as a badge of pride. It's something you work on, maybe through therapy and prayer, sometimes through medical intervention, but not wearing it and saying, if you're not this, shame on you.
Yes, it's certainly reinforced socially. I think that's a little bit shifting now. The culture is shifting in certain areas, not in all areas, but it certainly is reinforced. I think social media has a lot to do with it. I think our culture, how kids are raised, has a lot to do with it. There's that whole be kind culture we have. They're told to be kind. I think a lot of the social emotional learning that the kids have grown up with now is showing its fruits, because a lot of what it is not questioning things and going along in order to, go along, get along, to be nice. And so I think our kids have lost that rebellious nature that I think you and I probably grew up with. And this is sort of their way of rebelling, but it's obviously not healthy.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. People are recognizing this. A part of it is actually the science itself that's come out. I remember there was a very prominent British study in the last 2 or 3 years that talked about hormone therapy and the effects that these actually have on your health over long periods of time. Tell us what the science actually says about this, because you've pointed out their argument about suicide is bunk. That's not legitimate. But where is the actual study of the science on here? Or is it too new to really know at this point?
Well, in terms of this generation of children, we've had this huge explosion of children, just really more post the lockdowns. I think it started, things really amped up around 2018, 2019. So we haven't had enough time to study this cohort of youth that have all just jumped on this bandwagon, and the adults that have encouraged it, including all of our institutions, our doctors and the therapists. So we don't have this data at all to know how they're going to be. And quite frankly, this whole thing is experimental. I was actually going to say earlier, when you asked me about the consent, the reason that they really can't have consent is because even the doctors don't know. How can a patient consent to something when the doctors don't even know all of the outcomes of what they're prescribing? So,
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So how do you respond if a parent comes to you and says, Pamela, my son is saying he thinks he's transgender, or my daughter says she thinks she's transgender, she wants to become a man. She wants to use different pronouns. She's even considering hormone therapy. What's your answer? How do you counsel them on how to respond to that?
well, first of all, it depends on the age. So, and if they're still living at home, because a child or a minor versus an adult is different, because unfortunately, once they turn 18, they have less authority over their child. But usually, I usually start to explore what is underneath, help them understand what's underneath. The people I talk to already kind of know this, so it depends also on where they're at in terms of understanding the ideology. Do they recognize that their kid has been probably indoctrinated from the internet, probably has consumed porn that has influenced them, and asking them maybe what has happened to them or what has happened within the family structure that could have created a vulnerability to wanting to do this. What are the communication struggles within the family? I usually encourage them to really just try to connect with that young person, so because there's something going on for that person that they're struggling with, so you want to connect with them about that and help them with those things rather than zero in on the gender issue, depending on how long they've been in that rabbit hole. So there's a lot of it depends. But yeah, usually I start just exploring what's happening around, and helping them understand that it's nobody's trapped in the wrong body, and there's something else happening, and we need to help that person deal with that, and maybe help with the whole family in their communication.
Yeah, so it's like what you said with suicide. You're not talking about the suicide itself with somebody who might be prone to that. You're actually talking around it and contextualizing. It's not the gender that's the problem here. It's deeper problems, maybe trauma,
Hmm.
lifestyle, family related issues.
Exactly. And then a lot of what I talk about, because what's happened also culturally is how parents have deferred so much to experts to a fault. And now they have handed their kid over to some other therapist or a doctor that has done the transitioning behind their backs, like you said earlier. And I really try to encourage parents to stop running to an expert, almost including me. I mean, I work with them, but not long term. I just give them sort of the background. I give them the information so that they can be informed and then handle it themselves. Like, I really try to empower parents to recognize that they know their child best and to reach upon their own resources and not run straight to an expert. And if they do, because they might really need that, so if they do, that they stay heavily involved and that they continue to question things and don't follow blindly.
Are you in the minority view in your profession on this issue?
Oh, yeah. I still am. In my profession as a therapist, yeah. I'm not sure at large in the entire society. What I've noticed, there's still a lot of people, the people we call who are the normies, the people who aren't really thinking about this day to day.
Uh-huh.
Most of them don't even believe it's happening. Like, they're still at the point where they don't even know it's happening. So I don't think they would agree if they knew that 12-year-olds were getting their breasts removed. I don't think they'd agree with that, but they also just wouldn't believe it's happening. And then if they do believe it's happening, then they believe it's very rare. But it's actually not that rare. And if the people who believe in this had their way, it certainly wouldn't be rare at all. But because there's been a cohort of us that have finally spoken up, that have pushed back, this is maybe the hardest topic to push back against. Plenty of people who have prominent followings who have spoken up against several topics, like Michael Schellenberger is an example. He's spoken up against how the homelessness, agenda the progressives are enabling. He's spoken up against the anti-racist agenda and lots of other things. He wrote that book, San Francisco. But he said once he started talking about this trans agenda, he was behind what's called the W-Path files. He helped another woman named Mia Hughes write the W-Path files. And what that is you can look it up. It's a big document that exposes the major institution that has enabled all of these just really evil things, and it shows that they know it's evil, and it shows how how much they've manipulated our culture, our institutions. And he said when he was working with the W-Path files, that was when he had to hire security, and he was most afraid for his safety and his family's safety.
Unreal. Well, and we kind of get how to change parents' minds, right, through showing them this is more widespread and worse than you ever thought it would be. What about professionals, though, the experts, people in your field right now? What changes their mind? Are they equally tuned out, or are they looking at the same data you're going and drawing a completely different conclusion?
Honestly, it's really difficult because most of the people who have been to college have been indoctrinated on this topic, and they believe in their institutions, they believe in their profession. And I think that cognitive dissonance is so difficult for them to recognize that they're part of creating harm to patients because they are so bought into the fact that they're the good guys. I think it's really hard. There's that meme, am I the baddie?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, you're the baddie. And I don't think they can tolerate that. So it's very, very difficult to convince a therapist that this is wrong. And then some of them you can convince that it is wrong to a degree, but they still want to always have that open mind that there's always some kind of middle ground or shades of gray. But sometimes the right thing, the truth, is not always in the middle. So is it okay to sometimes chop a child's breast off? Or, are we when is it okay and when is it not okay?
Yes, that's right.
I don't think it's okay ever, no matter what, no matter how much distress they express, because they're a child. And then, I actually don't think it's even a good idea for adults, but, there is something about, free will, but I don't think insurance should pay for it, and we shouldn't be calling it healthcare. See, that's the difference. It's the way it's proposed as healthcare, as life-saving care. There's nothing life-saving about chopping off healthy body parts. But the world has turned so upside down on this subject that you have to figure out where to even start when you're having a conversation with that person, because one, they don't even believe it's happening, or two, they don't know if it is happening, what the problems are with it, and three, they don't believe they've been bamboozled to believe that there is some kind of magic gender soul that some people need to be saved from. So you have to really, it's not an easy task to convince other professionals. Plus, they're cowards. Therapists are afraid of conflict, and even doctors, they're afraid of conflict, and they are the kind of people that do really well in school, they don't push back. A lot of, traditional conservatives that I think you and I know are the entrepreneur type that are going to be a little more out of the box and push back and not be afraid to speak up when they think something's wrong. Well, doctors and therapists and people who do a lot of grad school, they're not that type.
I completely agree with you. It's why it's so important to question narratives. If your narrative, and this is very common on the progressive left, we're the good guys, well, then by extension, anything you do is beneficent. It's wonderful. And getting people, even if they remain on the left, I think Schellenberger's a good example of that. He's hardly some MAGA conservative, right? Even if they come to understand, wait a minute, these are lies and we're institutionalizing child abuse, right? Or at the very least, abusing of people's bodies and turning them, it's the opposite of healthcare, right? It's like a kind of drug addiction. It's destroying your body. We shouldn't celebrate that. We have to confront that. Well, Pamela Garfield Yeager, thank you for your wisdom. We really appreciate your time on the show and all the work that you're doing on this really important issue. As a father, I can't tell you how important I think this is, that there's real people telling truth out there. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
I'm Hayden Ludwig, and this is Restoration Spotlight, a project of Restoration News, your source of headline-smashing investigative journalism for the America First movement. Check us out at restoration-news.com. Until next time, stay vigilant and trust in God.